Welcome to the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center. It's a joy to welcome you today for an excellent presentation on a new exhibit that the McGivney Center has just opened. I'm pleased to introduce to you today Stephen Rasche. He is an international attorney and a member of the Knights of Columbus who since 2014 has provided legal counsel to the Archdiocese of Erbil in Iraq, centered on spiritual and humanitarian support for displaced persons, predominantly Christians who fled their homeland to avoid war or oppression or both. He's lived and worked in Iraq for years, and during that time was a founding officer of the Catholic University of Erbil. He also authored this acclaimed book, The Disappearing People, The Tragic Fate of Christians in the Middle East. Beginning in 2020, Steve extended the scope of his work to include care for displaced persons in Nigeria, including Catholic-run healthcare and education. He has served as an official representative of the Vatican's Dicastery for Refugees and Migrants and is a senior fellow at the Religious Freedom Institute in Washington, D.C. Recently, Steve joined the faculty at Franciscan University of Steubenville as a professor of theology, where he also serves as director of the Institute for Catholic Humanitarian Service. After a quarter century in the practice of law, Steve is effectively a full-time missionary now, developing and implementing humanitarian aid projects and training others to serve these people in need in regions of conflict in the Middle East and Africa. My hope is that your participation today will allow you to go beyond the news headlines, to understand more plainly the circumstances in Iraq, Nigeria, and beyond, and to develop a genuine solidarity with our Christian brothers and sisters who suffer due to their faith. Please help me to welcome Steve Rasche.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for that kind introduction. Before I begin, I'd like to say a word of thanks to the Blessed McGivney Pilgrimage Center for having me and for having this exhibit here, and give a special thanks to the three wonderful women who made this possible, Bethany, Tiffany, and Kathy, and also to my good friend Tyler Lomnitzer, who helps me fill in the cracks wherever they might be. I'd also like to give a special recognition to the past Supreme Knight Carl Anderson, who originally supported this work in Iraq, and to current Supreme Knight Patrick Kelly, who continued in that support as it merged into Nigeria. I would not have ever gone to Nigeria but for Supreme Knight Anderson, who asked if we could find a way to see if we could take the best practices that we had learned in Iraq, much of it in service supported by the Knights of Columbus, and see what we could do to bring that to our brothers and sisters in Nigeria who were suffering persecution. Was same in some respects, but different in others. But it was at the initial request in support of the Knights of Columbus that my first trip to Nigeria happened. So I think it's important to recognize that. So as Peter told you, it's been almost 11 years now since I left the world of commercial legal practice and entered into full-time work for the church. I not intentionally set out to make that decision, at least not at that time. But over the years, I've become open and really understanding to the reality of providence, divine providence at work. And by the time my work in Iraq had begun in earnest, it was clear to me that my personal calling was to be there out in the field with the people you'll see in this exhibit. I'm most grateful to have found this work and grateful to the Knights of Columbus for all of your support in this work through the years. While this work that I've engaged in is not specifically or exclusively in documenting the surroundings in which we worked, this was still a natural part of our efforts. You know, as a lawyer, evidence, persuasive evidence is always a critical thing, and it was just around us everywhere, and especially in Iraq. We could see that there were serious war crimes that had been committed, and they were going to need real help. And so as the ISIS war continued, and we began to recover the Christian towns in Nineveh out towards Mosul, the church formed a small group of priests and myself, and we would go into these towns essentially as they were being liberated to find out what was there. There was a big concern about preserving the property of the church and making sure that the towns themselves, which were almost exclusively Christian, were not being looted or otherwise destroyed, desecrated, and whatnot. So we would come into these towns, and in Nineveh, there'll be one town, and then the next town is kind of 5 miles away, and they're all just clusters, and you can see the one from the next. And the war kind of went from one of these towns to the other. So often we would be in the towns with the priests and a handful of security, and you could still hear the fighting in the next town, and we would go there in another week or two as ISIS was pushed away. And through all of this, I was taking photographs. I had somewhat of a background in photography from some earlier work that I'd done, and I would just take photographs. And my initial intention in taking those photographs was just to have a record of what had happened. But over time, as the catalog grew and I began to look at them, you would see in the faces this real pattern of the dignity, the inherent dignity of the human person, regardless of the situation. And that really became true even as I moved this work to Nigeria. And we would see these people in just these awful situations. You know, they'd lost everything. They'd been displaced. They'd been terrorized. You know, they'd lost family members. In the case of Nigeria, and some of these pictures you'll see, often the people are on the verge of starvation. And they're on the verge of starvation not because that was their natural circumstance, but because they'd been displaced. They'd been violently and forcibly displaced and had no system, of self-sustenance to rely upon. So you see all of these things in their faces, and as I began to catalog these photographs over the years, it became clear to me that this might be a good way to show people what was taking place, so people could understand and have some way of sharing in solidarity with them. And so that's the exhibit that you see today is primarily a portrait exhibit. You know, it's not just a smattering of bad, blown-up stuff that happened, but real people. And so I hope when you go through the exhibit, you'll look at them and have a chance to see them as people. You know, I tell people, as Catholics, we believe in the universal church, and I've been blessed to see the reality of our church as a universal church throughout the world. And all of these places, the Catholic Church is present. You know, almost all of the people you'll see in these photographs are Catholics. It's not really known widely, but in Iraq, the vast majority of the Christians there are in fact Catholics. From the first century, they received their gospel from the first apostles in the first century. So I hope you can see in this exhibit that we are a universal church, and see in it how our service and our protection and our help is meaningful in that universal sense. Just close with this before I get into some of these photographs that I want to discuss. You know, Blessed Father McGivney was all about the dignity of the person. I think that's really a clear thing that we know. And from that respect, I think it's just absolutely fitting that this exhibit is here in his name. So I think that the best way to discuss some of this further is to bring you into some of these photos, which I'd like to do. And I'll go through a few of them quickly here, but again, we encourage you to go and take a look at the exhibit itself. I think the folks here have done just a really outstanding job at putting this whole exhibit together. So with that, Iraq, before I show you these photos, a couple, just one technical aspect, to Iraq. I get asked this by people in the photography world, what equipment did you use, and how did you get these things done? And the answer is, in Iraq, it was a war zone. I mean, it was a real war. People were shooting at each other and blowing stuff up. And in the Nineveh province, where a lot of these photographs were taken, the church, because this was all historically Christian land, and the church was really the only civilian infrastructure that existed. So the bishops and the priests were the people who were really figuring out what to do in there. But even with that, we were continually having to go through checkpoints. Today this area belongs to, such and such a part of a militia or such and such a branch of the military. Maybe the Americans are here one day, the Iraqis are there the next day, the Kurds are there the next day. And it was just chaos. And one of the things we weren't allowed to do is really move through these checkpoints with any heavy-duty equipment, camera equipment. So almost, as a result, almost all of the photographs you'll see here from Iraq were taken on an iPhone. So don't underestimate the power of the iPhone. Say the best camera you have is the one that you have with you. And so as you look at some of these Iraq photos, they're a little bit grainier, a little bit grittier, and that's because they were taken at that time. I believe it was the iPhone 6, because this is these photographs, some of them date back to 2015. So let me start by going through some of these. So this woman, this is a displaced woman. This photo was actually taken in Erbil. She was displaced from Karakosh in the Nineveh Plain, an Iraqi Catholic woman. We had moved her 3 times already. The church had moved her into 3 different IDP camps already at the time we took this picture. And I came and I asked through the interpreter, "Mother, do you mind, we have seen each other so many times. Can I take your picture?" And she said, "Yes, my son, but every time you come, I know you're going to move me. When will I be able to go back home?" And when you see the full picture, you see when I asked to take her picture, she didn't stand there like that. She stood like this, on her own, without any asking. The picture's one that's close to my heart. This one here, okay, this is a place that has some meaning for the Knights of Columbus. This is the Church of Mar Adai in Karamles. That's a town that was rebuilt by the Knights of Columbus. And this is showing what the church looked like as we entered into it. ISIS had been moved out of the town the day before. You could still hear fighting on the outskirts of the town. And this is the church as it looked as we came into it. The statue that you see there, the desecrated statue of the Virgin Mary, we found all of the remaining pieces, her hands, her head. They were reattached, and later on in the visit of Pope Francis to Erbil, this statue was blessed and consecrated by Pope Francis. One other note you see there on the right is Father Thabit Habib al-Mekko. Father Thabit, one of the most courageous priests that I encountered in Iraq during this time. He was later made bishop. He is now the Bishop of Al-Qosh. Unfortunately, Bishop Thabit is gravely ill from all of his work that he did in trying to recover and restore his towns. He developed pulmonary fibrosis from all of the fibers of all of the burned buildings that he was in, and he is gravely ill. And I would ask that you remember him in your prayers. He's really a special human being. So this is another photograph. This was actually taken in Karamanlis as well. This is an interesting one. By the time this photo was taken, ISIS had been out of the town for a couple of months, but the town was still largely destroyed. But on a special occasion of one of their local saints, a group of people went out from Erbil. They traveled out with security to say a small mass in a chapel that was less damaged than the main church, but it had been desecrated and it was filled with rubble and everything. But the townspeople had kind of cleaned it out a little bit, enough so that they could say a simple mass there. And this is one of the priests that came along to it. He's a retired priest, an elderly priest. But what he's saying to this soldier here is, you can't come in here with your cigarette and your guns. And yeah, so again, the people are trying to hold on to their dignity. And it just strikes you every time you continue to encounter it. This one here's a happy one. You know, one of the few happy stories to come out of Iraq in the last 25, 30 years was the visit of Pope Francis to Iraq, and a visit that the Knights of Columbus paid played a big role, a very quiet and dignified role in supporting the costs attendant with that visit. And it was really one of the few positive examples of Iraq that they could show a positive face to the rest of the world. And what you have here is the sister from the Chaldean Daughters of Mary. This is Sister Tiba, and she is setting the cloth for the papal altar, and she's fitting it out ahead of the Mass. And this is the first time that she's had the opportunity to really smile in years. She was in an orphanage in the hills up above the Nineveh Plain, watched the war unfold beneath her for several years, wondered if they would make it through it or not, and we were often there for dinners, myself and the other priests during that time. But here she is on a happy day that the Knights of Columbus played a real part in. And if you see in the exhibit, her picture is right next to the vestments worn by the Holy Father in that Mass. So that's a happy part of this exhibit. This is an interesting one just to show you, Iraq is an interesting place in case you can't see clearly. So this is a statue, a shrine to the Virgin Mary. This is in Baghdad. It's outside the Church of Mary the Immaculate. And the people you see praying outside of it are all Muslim women. So there you go, the power of Mary to hopefully unite. So I move into Nigeria here. The differences, and you'll see them in the exhibit, the differences between these two groups of pictures. In Iraq, the towns and the structures were all well built in the sense that they were permanent structures. A lot of them had been there for a long time. And so that when there were attacks and things that happened on them, you could still come in and see the scars, the remains, the rubble, and everything. Iraq was a place where the violence of what had happened there was readily apparent. In contrast, in Nigeria, most of the violence against the Christians is taking place in rural villages. You can't really get out there when these villages are destroyed. They're just burned down to the ground, and there's really nothing to see. So what you have as a record more of what happened in Nigeria and what's continuing to happen in Nigeria is in the faces of the people themselves and the situations they're living in now. So there's these two different kind of feels to these photographs as you go through them. This picture here, you know, the violence in Nigeria is just unbelievable. The level of it. It's a big country, much of it is rural, and again, so you can't readily see some of it, but in sheer numbers, it's tens of thousands of Christians. I think it's 60, 70,000 Christians that have been murdered over the last decade. In terms of displaced people in Nigeria, I believe the number is over 5 million people displaced inside the country right now. And in these photographs that you'll be seeing in the exhibit, the thing to understand when you look at these faces is that almost all of them would have seen a scene such as this, which is a mass burial in a village after an attack. Because a lot of these types of photos are very graphic in nature, we chose not to really show many of them because this to make this exhibit accessible to the complete public. But you should have that in mind. As you look at the faces of the people in those photos, almost every one of them would have seen a scene like this, including the young children. This here is just a quick photo. This actual statue is this was Christ the Redeemer. It was brought by one of the Irish fathers, we believe, in the 1960s to a church in northeast Nigeria that was overrun by Boko Haram. You can see what they did to it. That actual statue is in the exhibit, and that's why I'm showing it here. And for those of you watching online or virtually, this statue itself is in the exhibit. So this is an interesting statue. You know, the church in Nigeria, the Catholic faith in Nigeria, comes to the world courtesy of the Irish fathers and sisters. There's just no way you can get around it. Without the presence of the Irish fathers, the faith would not have come to Nigeria. And there's all different orders, the Spiritans, the Augustinians, the Society of St. Patrick, but they are the people who brought the faith to Nigeria beginning in the 20s and 30s of the last century. And this particular photo is a statue of Bishop McGivney, who was one of the early fathers, then bishops in southern Nigeria. He's still tremendously revered there today. And the thing to keep in mind here is, you know, you hear all these stories. Those of you who have visited Ireland know that it's been a tough period this last decade for the church in Ireland. And yet in Nigeria, where they have the legacy of these Irish fathers, the church is absolutely booming. And these Irish fathers are deeply, deeply revered to this day. It's really an amazing thing. I had not really thought about it or been prepared for it when I went there to Nigeria, but you know, for any of you people with contacts to Ireland, you should know that the work of these fathers is alive and well and booming all over Nigeria. And as evidence of that, here is a group of confirmands. This is in an outstation church, if you can believe it. There's over 300 confirmands there. This is the bishop making his rounds to the outstation churches, getting them ready for confirmation the next day. But this is typical. When they do Confirmation Sunday, it's hundreds, sometimes even thousands. The church is just absolutely booming. Of course, you have a booming church. What do you need? You need some catechists, and these are some of the catechists. I believe they were ahead of that confirmation mass that we were just showing there. But I think this is important to see because the Knights of Columbus are one of the lead funders in the efforts to provide the Nigerian church with the catechists that it needs. It's one thing to baptize and confirm. It's another thing to properly catechize the youngsters and the new confirmands so that they have a firm foundation in the church, and the Knights of Columbus are playing a critical role in that. These are the people. Okay, so here's a less happy situation. What you see here, this is in northeast Nigeria here. These boys are on the beginning of serious starvation. And if you see these pictures, when you look at them in the exhibit, I'd urge you to take a close look. You can see, particularly in this young fellow up front, these are all displaced boys that have been moved out forcibly from the areas that they belong to. They're all Christians. These guys are all Catholics, and they were forced out by Boko Haram, which is the African equivalent of ISIS. And because of that, their food security situation is really difficult. And again, these guys are on the edge of real starvation. It's a real issue in Nigeria right now. It's one of the things that falls out. You know, it's bad enough being displaced and persecuted, but that's not like a one-time event. And then the people have experienced it and they go on. There's always all of these trailing things that fall out of being displaced, and food security is at the top of that. Okay, so this is a group of lepers at Evening Rosary. This is a leper camp in southern Nigeria in Cross River State. These lepers are all Catholics. They're there at their group rosary. And I show this particular picture because through the work of the Knights of Columbus, a large shipment of wheelchairs was just delivered to these people. And those guys all now have Knights of Columbus wheelchairs to move around in. It's great work. And it's really, for those of you who are involved in the wheelchair program or know anything about it, you know, it's often these simple things make just huge differences. You know, one quick word about leprosy. You know, in the West, we think of that as a disease that no longer exists. But you know, you peel off the cover of things and start getting into some of these countries, it's there. And you know, these are things we can do something about. Leprosy is completely preventable. And in many cases, it can be stopped, not cured, but stopped so that the people can go on and live productive lives. So this is simply a matter of putting resources to a problem. This man here, this is another issue of putting resources to a problem. In this picture, this is a camp elder in Abuja. He has malaria. I asked him if I could take his picture. He said, absolutely, I want your people to see what malaria looks like. This particular IDP camp is in the capital city of Abuja. He's not 2 kilometers away from the Ministry of Health. Within a year and a half after this picture was taken, which I believe was 2021, this man died of typhoid in that same camp. All preventable diseases. Okay, one of my favorite photographs is Sister Mary. She's a Dominican sister from Zamfara, up in northern Nigeria, north central Nigeria. It's a center of some of the worst violence. And got to know her over several days, and a story of just remarkable presence of the sisters. You know, you saw Sister Tiba earlier, but the presence of the sisters, you know, we forget sometimes in this country how critical a role that the sisters play, and Sister Mary, just her inherent dignity and grace. She lives in a tremendously dangerous part of the world, gets up every day and goes to take care of people. And I think you can see, you know, everything just in her face right there. Right here, this is another woman. I bring her up as well. This is an elder in northeast Nigeria, and a highly respected woman elder in Nigeria, in Africa. The elder women are held in tremendously high esteem by the people in their communities. And this particular woman came to an event at the church, at one of the local churches, and she had to be carried in by the people in her community. She's infirm and can't walk. She is, again, one of the recipients of the Knights of Columbus wheelchair. And the last one here, this photograph, again, just showing the dignity of the people. This is, again, in northeast Nigeria. Her husband had been murdered by Boko Haram, leaving her with 5 children. And she had a small farm plot that had been provided to her by the church because of a flood that occurred, a changing pattern of the rainfall there. A flood had occurred, it wiped everything out, and it was not clear how she and hundreds of others similarly situated were going to be able to feed their children. They had barely had any food for the last 2 months, and they were on the verge again of a real food security issue, starvation with the children. And in this picture, she's just learned that the church has a supply of food on hand, and that she is amongst several hundred of the widowed mothers with children that is now going to get a 2-month food supply, and she's overcome. And yeah, so that's when she's turned away, and she's giving a silent prayer, and you could see it happening. I wish I'd had the whole thing on video, but anyhow, so that's the church at work. These are people with faith, and I hope as you go in and take a look at the exhibit, there are many more faces, but you think about that, and think most importantly that these are our sisters and brothers, and they're people with dignity of their own, and whenever they talk, and whenever I go there and speak to them, the one thing they always say is, please tell our brothers and sisters there at the Knights of Columbus, there in the West, to think about us, to pray for us, and we pray for them. So thank you very much for coming here for this. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and again, I encourage you to go and see the exhibit.
Steve, we thank you. And I have a microphone that I want to pass around so that the audience that's viewing this online will have an opportunity to hear your questions. But if I may, I'd like to ask the first question. As an American Catholic, someone that has 3 square meals a day, a roof over my head, cool in the summer and warm in the winter, a car that can take me where I want to go, even though some might consider me a good Catholic because I practice my faith, I still feel as though I take it for granted. And I look at these situations as you describe, and I realize that faith is everything to these people. And so I'm curious, as an American Catholic that has now traveled and seen the horrors that these people are facing, what has your faith become as a result of these experiences?
Sure, it's a good question. You know, like many people, up until I began this work, you know, my faith was a thing that I held as an important part of my life, but not really a tested part of my life. I had been reasonably fortunate, and the idea of a universal church, well, we say it, and I understood that in the abstract, it meant something. These last, years where I've been involved in this work, I've come to understand my faith in a completely different way. We really tested and being with people who were in a position to really say, you're testing me, in a way that we don't really, except in some extreme circumstances, readily come to. But we would be in these situations in Iraq and in Nigeria where the people could legitimately say every day, you're testing me, and when you saw their faith through all of that, it changes you. It absolutely changed me in terms of my own faith, which is significantly different and I hope greater and richer for having been with these people. But the other thing I would say, though, in that is, it's not necessary to go to these places. I mean, I ended up there. I just kind of put my toe in the stream and let it take me. I'd worked in the Middle East before I ended up doing this work, and so it was a place that I knew. I'd worked abroad all my life. I'd been going. So being in unusual places wasn't new. But when I look at the situation here in the U.S., for people who are saying, okay, well, I think I have my faith. I'm not really sure I've tested it much. You don't have to go very far anywhere in this country to find a way to say, okay, how serious am I about my faith and what can I do with it? And so I would hope that is, what you could take from looking at these photos, just saying, okay, well, look, in these clearly extreme situations, these people are showing what their faith means to them. Might we also think about ways in which we can demonstrate and look about what our faith really means to us? I think the other thing is, again, the universal church. The Catholic Church is a universal church. I have been on almost every continent in the last 15 years through this work. All over Asia, South America, Latin America, Africa, Middle East. The Catholic Church is a universal church. And if we respect it as a universal church, rather than just a big conglomeration of things we can all disagree on, and instead look to it as the cohesive, still universal church that it is, and swim within that stream, it's always been an astounding thing to me how powerful the church still is as a force for good if we look to use it in the way and participate in it in the way that it's out there for us. I think it is a universal church. We forget about that in the U.S. Maybe sometimes we get a little bit parochial about protecting our own particular church, but when you're there on Sunday and you pray and you think about these things, we're part of a universal church, and it's worth thinking on.
Other questions?
If I may, Mr. Rasche, first of all, thank you so much for what you have done. But can you possibly elaborate on the hard decision that you had to make of yourself to basically give up the last 10 years of your life helping these people? And I just want to also say, in many of the photographs, the people are smiling, and that is, after what they've been through, so phenomenal to see.
Well, I guess I would answer that question to say, I think we're all searching. Everybody's always on their own faith journey, and we search throughout our lives. My situation is kind of, I hate to call it the classic situation, but it's not the unheard of situation. I would just say God came knocking in the form of open heart surgery. I was involved in pretty bare knuckles law, really doing aggressive stuff amongst what lawyers do. unfortunately, too much of. And I came home after a particularly bruising case. We had forced settlement on it with I don't know, 6 or 7 different parties. We were in 5 different jurisdictions, 3 of them federal, 1 of them state, and 1 of them in Europe, and everybody was trying to kill each other. And I came home just before Thanksgiving, felt terrible, and the long and the short of it is in the first week of December, after that Thanksgiving, I had open heart surgery and had a long time after that to really think about what is it that I was doing, and most importantly, where was I in my faith? Did I really believe? Was I really serious about my faith, and what was I going to do with it on the when I came out the other side? And so that was it. I would say, God came calling or whatever, but I thought about it, and it became pretty clear to me that in the productive time that I had left on this earth, that I needed to change my ways and go down a different path. And so I spent a lot of time in prayer, a lot of time in the church, a lot of time with older priests that I trusted in discernment, and really leaning very hard on my faith, and then at a certain point said, okay, let's go. And here I am.
Other questions?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you again, Stephen, for this talk. And I have a question for you for Iraq. I think many people who have not seen the exhibit yet might not know that those photos are earlier than the Nigeria photos. They're from the 20-teens. And can you comment about the situation in Iraq and how it's evolved since you've taken those photos, and also since Pope Francis's visit to Iraq?
Sure, it's a good question. So there's not open war, open fighting really going on in Iraq now for some time, especially in the areas up north where most of the Christians live, although many of them are still in Baghdad as well. But most of the areas up north have been relatively peaceful. It's not that ISIS doesn't still exist. They show up every now and then, especially out towards Syria and further out in the desert. But by and large, the real fighting is over for the time being. People make the mistake, though, of thinking, okay, well, everything is okay for the Christians now, and that's simply not the case. There was a large Christian population in Mosul, the city of Mosul, and 99.9% of them will never return, at least not in our lifetimes. Most of them have left the country or have moved to other places. The level of trust vis-a-vis their neighbors, many of whom were people that turned them in to ISIS, it's just not there. So there's a real issue that still remains in terms of trust for the people in Iraq, the Christians in Iraq. But the other issue remains is that they're still subject to other forms of discrimination and persecution. Iraq is a Sharia country. And although there are many elements, fortunately, within Iraq, within the government, that are very supportive of the Christian population, there still remain very deep-seated prejudices against the Christians, which makes it difficult for them to have fair access to education, fair access to the court system, all sorts of things, protection of their own lands, their own properties. So their situation remains tenuous, and it's one not to lose track of. There were as many as 3 million Christians in 2003, and that number is down to probably about 150,000 now. And that's a population that could disappear pretty quickly if the world turns the other way. They're deeply dependent upon the solidarity and support that they continue to get from their fellow Christians around the world, and most grateful, of course, for the support that they continue to receive from the Knights of Columbus.
Other questions?
Thank you for the beautiful presentation. I was wondering if you could talk about your photographic journey a bit. You mentioned you started kind of on a documentary level, but what did it eventually mean to you as you pursued it more and more? Did it become more, were you more into the photography and the artistic elements? And I know you enjoyed meeting all these people, telling their stories, but what did it mean to you as you pursued this journey?
Yes, it's a good question. So a lot of the work we did, honestly, was video work. In order to preserve the record, we did a lot of interviews. We to try to capture what had been going on. And in terms of the photography, this exhibit is kind of comes about through fortuitous circumstances. I had known the folks at the Sheen Center in New York City, is the Performing Arts Center of the Archdiocese of New York. We had put together a video presentation based on Pope Francis's visit to Iraq, and I filmed and produced and much of that video. And through that, we got to know the people from the Sheen Center, and they asked, well, we were looking at some of these stills that you have that you used in the video. Would you be willing to make an exhibit for us at the Sheen Center? And we just had, hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of these photographs. And people had said, well, you should really put those together and start putting them out. So the Sheen Center exhibit was the catalyst for it. We put it up. It was some of these photos. It was a much smaller exhibit, but it was really well received. And we thought, maybe there's a value for that. We have it in our minds these days that it needs to be a moving picture. It needs to be a video. It needs to be a movie, whatever. And black and white still seems so, last century. In so many ways, but they proved to be really effective, and it got us thinking about them, so that especially in Nigeria, we were able to continue working with it. Would we have done maybe some things differently in Iraq when we were taking those photographs? If we'd been thinking to this day, yeah, we might have. But by the time we're here in Iraq, or in Nigeria, a lot of these photos you see from Nigeria are taken on big full frame, Canon R5s and equivalents with some pretty big lenses that we just, in Iraq, we took the phone out and snapped it like that. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. Really love for me personally, I love the world of black and white photography and portraiture. I've really become attached to it.
Anyone else?
Steve, thank you very much. This is very moving. I've been looking at that picture and all of your photos. They kind of remind me of icons. They're iconic pictures of like among the persecuted. So the blessed are the persecuted, Jesus talks about, and it's sort of a witness to, to the saints in a way. It's like Pope Benedict talks about the attraction. If the church is going to grow, or I forget what the context is, but the saints are what's going to draw people, and beauty, like artistic beauty. So you kind of combine these, and you talk about the universal church. It's kind of a vision that's pretty big. I really appreciated that. Could you just talk about that, kind of the witness of beauty and sanctity that you're kind of like, you were right there?
Sure. I think it goes back to my opening comments. The one thing that you cannot miss when you're doing this work is the inherent dignity, and in dignity I would encompass the inherent beauty of the human person that still remains inside all of us. And so that's a thing that stretches no matter where you are. I have a lot of photographs now that I've taken in other parts of the world, including here in the U.S. And if you open your eyes to it, I think this is a thing, you know, we're in so much of a rush and trying to protect our own little square. And when you start thinking about the church as a universal church, you start thinking about, okay, well, those are all our brothers and sisters as well, even those who are not, you know, members, you know, strictly speaking, of the Catholic Church, but you think about the universality of the human condition and finding that spark of dignity, that spark of beauty, you know, it's there. It's there. I would also say, though, that conversely, one of the things that it does make you aware of is that there's evil out there as well. And it sensitizes you to being able to discern that, look, this thing is really evil. Again, that's not the purpose of this exhibit. Certainly we have some of those photographs as well. But, you know, dignity, beauty, I think it is all part of it. And it's what really I had hoped we could show when we put this exhibit together, when we started looking at all these photos. What could we give to the rest of the world out there?
Thank you for the important work that you're doing. It's not lost on us that it's very dangerous for you to put yourself in these countries at personal risk. What steps do you take to mitigate personal risk, and how do you navigate around these places safely?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, I had worked in strange places before I began this work and had been pretty fully trained and prepared on, you know, personal security and working with security teams and all of this. And it was kind of unusual, interesting when we came to the work with the church, we adopted what people in the security field would understand as a very low-profile approach. Simple cars. We were part of the church. I mean, I was always and am always fully embedded with the church. And so we simply went about as people who belonged in that place. We had no particular security beyond that. We other than, you know, the best security that you can have. But for the most part, unless it was for a specific event, like the one where we have the photograph where we have the priest telling the soldier, you can't come in here with your cigarette and that gun. So we had a security detail with us on that because it was a gathering of people. But for the most part, our work, we were there amongst the people, subjecting ourselves to the same dangers that they were as well. And of course, you know, we're prudent. You know, as prudent as you can be. You know, it's like to say in Iraq, it's a situation where most times you feel like things are safe, but when it gets dangerous really fast. And it gets really dangerous really fast, and it gets really dangerous really fast. But a lot of prudence and keeping a low profile. Nigeria is a much more random place. Nigeria is just, security is a real issue there. We do our best, you know. But certainly we don't do anything. I've never done anything in this work to be surrounded with visible, high-profile security. It just separates you from the people. And I think when you engage in this type of work, I think it kind of comes along with it. You have to be with the people if you're going to be effective, and part of that is you share in their risks.
Other questions? Well, hearing none, Steve, thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for being an extension of the outreach of the Knights of Columbus. We're very grateful to know through this photo exhibit, but also through your sharing today, the good work that's being done through the organization that we all belong to and have such a sense of attachment to, because it tries to see that universal church in the spirit of Father McGivney, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. he had a great concern for those on the margins. And he didn't just observe, but he went to them and sought to serve them himself. And through your efforts, you are continuing Father McGivney's good work. We're grateful for that. And we hope that many other people who come to see your photos will have a new appreciation for the sufferings that they have and a greater solidarity with them.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for coming. Again, I encourage you to see the exhibit and to encourage others to come as well. For people who are watching online, again, we hope that you do come. There's quite a few more photographs, and I think that it'd be worth your while to come. Thank you again.